Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell, and in today's video, we're going to look at the role of different participants in the workplace. So, our study design specifies that we need to know the role of employees and the human resource manager in the workplace, but we also need to know the role of the unions, employer associations, and the Fair Work Commission in the workplace. And so, those three stakeholders are heavily involved in what's known as workplace relations. So, before we get into the role of each one of those participants, we're going to look at what workplace relations is. So, workplace relations refers to the interaction between the employer and the employees, but more specifically in regards to areas such as wages, employment conditions, and workplace disputes. So, wages being the money that the employees receive for the work that they perform, but employment conditions, things like working hours, what duties and responsibilities they have, what entitlements they have in terms of how much annual leave or sick leave or long service leave or parental leave that they get, and a whole range of other entitlements that employees receive, and workplace disputes that may occur between two or multiple employees or between an employee and the business. And so that's what workplace relations is referring to. So, the aim of workplace relations is to have employees that are satisfied with their wages and conditions so that they're more likely to give effort towards the achievement of business objectives, and the business is more likely to attract and retain quality employees because of those quality wages and conditions. But also, the aim is on the other side as well, so that the business is able to remain productive and competitive in a global environment, and also so that disputes are minimized. And if disputes do occur, that they're resolved quickly. Because having poor workplace relations, it can create a really negative environment where the employees are dissatisfied and constantly fighting with their employer and even other employees. So ideally, the business is looking to have really positive workplace relations. Now, in future videos, we're going to look at wages and employment conditions and how they're determined. We're also going to look at workplace disputes and how they're resolved if they do arise. But for now, just keep in mind that workplace relations is about the interaction between employer and employee in regards to those things, and that will help you when we go through the role of the different participants. So, our first participant are the employees, and we know that they're the ones that are working in the business in exchange for some form of remuneration. Now, their role is to carry out the tasks in their job description. So, when an employee begins at a business, they're given a job description, and that outlines the tasks and responsibilities in that role, and they're to perform those, as well as work towards the achievement of business objectives. And also, the employee should be following any business policies that are in place. Now, with regards to workplace relations, remembering workplace relations being about wages, conditions, disputes, and the like, well, the employees could be involved in the process of negotiating a new wage agreement. That could be directly, where they're actually negotiating themselves, or it could be they have a representative and they simply want to put forward their ideas on what they want in a new wage agreement. Once the employer has actually put together an agreement and put together a proposal, well, it's then the role of the employees to possibly vote on that agreement. And the employees, if these kind of wage negotiations are not going all that well, they may be involved in taking what's called industrial action, such as a strike, where the employees protest by leaving work and actually not performing any work in protest to try and fight for higher wages. The next participant is the human resource manager, who is responsible for managing the relationship between the employees and the business. So, as we've looked at in previous videos, their role is to be involved in recruitment, training, employee motivation, and all the things we've been looking at during this outcome. Now, with regards to workplace relations issues, the human resource manager is there to represent the employer. That does not mean they're always against the employees or anything like that. They're still trying to get the best out of employees, but in workplace relations issues, they are there to represent the employer. And so things that they may be involved in is things like managing disputes or any workplace conflict that comes about. Well, it's their job to try and work on what's actually occurring and trying to resolve that issue so that the employees can get back to being productive. They could be involved in the negotiation of a new wage agreement, again, representing the employer in those negotiations. They could be ensuring that any new agreement, so if new wages, let's say the employees actually fight for new wages and better conditions, and some of these things change, well, it's the human resource manager's role to actually implement them when they're supposed to be implemented, as well as their role is to keep the business up to date with any workplace relations changes, whether that be to the legislation or whether that be to any changes in conditions that are occurring for the employees. Well, it's their role to ensure that the business is meeting their obligations. Next, we have unions, and a union is an organisation that represents the collective interest of employees in the workplace. So they are workplace relations specialists, and an employee can pay a fee to become a member of a union and therefore use that union to help support or represent them throughout the workplace. So one of their roles is to offer advice or even representation to the employees during the negotiation of a new wage agreement because they're specialists that deal with this regularly. They can resolve workplace issues by being a voice for employees or even offering support or representation during a workplace dispute. Rather than an employee having to work through that dispute themselves, they can bring in specialists from the union to help them work through that and support them. They can organise industrial action such as a strike to try and present to the business how important the employees are in their fight for better wages and better conditions. Overall, they're trying to ensure that employers are meeting their obligations. We now have employer associations who are organisations that represent the interest of employers in workplace relations issues. So we've just looked at unions who are representing the employees. We now have employer associations who do very much do a similar thing, but they're doing it for the employer. So they can offer advice or represent employers during the negotiation of a new wage agreement, provide support, advocacy for employers in workplace relations issues, and offer support and even represent employers during workplace disputes. So if the employee has a dispute and they feel like the business has not performed or met their obligations, well, the employer can bring in an employer association or seek advice from an employer association to look at how to move forward and see whether they actually have met their obligations, as well as they can offer advice of changes to workplace relations legislation to ensure that employers are keeping up to date with their obligations. And finally, we have the Fair Work Commission, which is Australia's independent workplace relations tribunal, and they are responsible for overseeing or regulating the entire workplace relations system. So in Australia, we have this legislation called the Fair Work Act, and it's the role of the Fair Work Commission to ensure that businesses and employees are carrying out their obligations in the Fair Work. And so part of their role is to provide a safety net of minimum wages and conditions for all employees across the country. That ensures that no Australian can receive wages or conditions that are below those that have been set by the Fair Work Commission, provides that real safety net and that employee protection. They also hear unfair dismissal claims. They regulate and monitor industrial action. So if the employees or the union want to go on strike, well, they need to apply to the Fair Work Commission before they can do so legally. They hear and investigate bullying and harassment claims from employees to try and eradicate and prevent workplace bullying. They also approve workplace agreements. So once the employees and the employer have come to an agreement over wages and conditions, they need to send that off to the Fair Work Commission for their approval. And also they assist in resolving any workplace disputes. They don't have to be involved in resolving disputes. However, if the business and the employees can't come to a resolution, they can call upon the Fair Work Commission to come and assist them to come to some form of resolution. So let's take a look at how this system works. We've got here an example of a construction company where the employees are represented on the right in their hard hats, and we've got the human resource manager represented on the left. Now, remember, the human resource manager is representing the employer. Now, the employees are working at the company, and if they have any concerns, they may raise those with the human resource manager, and they would look at those concerns and try and work through them. So this is what we call at enterprise level, where they're working at the same company and they're dealing with it at their workplace or at the company. However, if required, above this, we have specialists in workplace relations, should they ever be required. And representing the employees is the industry union, for example, the CFMEU, while representing the employer is the employer association, for example, Master Builders Victoria. So should the employees have a dispute or even just some concerns about something to do with their wages or over the safety of the work site, or if the employee has been dismissed, for example, and they feel that it's been unfair, then the employees or the business may need advice or support so they can receive that from their union or their employer association, respectively. And they would then try and work through those concerns to hopefully come to a resolution. Now, overseeing all of this system is the Fair Work Commission. And the Fair Work Commission, they may not be directly involved in any of this unless they are required, but it's their role to ensure that both the employer and the employees are dealt with fairly, ensuring that the elements of the Fair Work Act are actually carried out. And if they are required to come in and help resolve this dispute or involved in anything that's occurring in terms of workplace relations, then they can do so. So just to recap, workplace relations refers to the interaction between the employer and the employees, but particularly in regards to areas such as wages, employment conditions, and workplace disputes. And the participants that are in our study design are the employees, human resource manager, unions, employer associations, and the Fair Work Commission. So that brings us to the end of this video. Just keep in mind, it's not always easy to understand workplace relations initially. And so over the next 2 videos, we're going to continue looking at workplace relations, particularly over wages and conditions and how they're determined, as well as disputes. And so hopefully after those 3 videos, you'll get a clearer picture of what workplace relations and a more in-depth understanding of workplace relations and what it is and how it works. So I look forward to seeing you in those 2 videos. But until then, just remember that for questions, activities, and help in your VCE journey, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.